The tournament is heating up, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/BlueWire and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the net. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/BlueWire to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. 21 plus and present in New Jersey. First online real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. We're here to talk about Michigan State's new commitment for the 2024 class. Kur Teng. I'm sorry, totally blanked on the name as I'm sitting here. I'm on.
Well, at least you got it right. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot of interesting variations on that name. Kevin Tolbert.
Yes,
style,
right, exactly.
For however long Kur is in.
Yeah, I think I saw someone post something about Tang, and that for those of you who are like 40 or above, you definitely remember, the drink of the astronauts, which is.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. The astronauts.
But which is like one of the worst orange drinks ever. I don't even know why we thought
Terrible.
That was okay.
Absolutely
but I feel like at the time
awful.
I thought as a kid it was okay.
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was marketed that way because, or was as successful as it was in part because of the astronaut thing. That, isn't this cool that you could take a powder and turn it into a drink? Not really.
I mean, it's not like they didn't have Kool-Aid. I had Kool-Aid. It was really good.
Right. Which was infinitely better. Yeah.
So anyway, before we begin, I just want to shout out a quick thank you to Kenneth Kramer, who gave us a one-time gift via PayPal. Thank you so much, Ken, for supporting the show and supporting all we do. I'm here on remote in Houston, Texas, at the Final Four, and actually in the fitness room of this hotel after the national championship game. That's how much we're dedicated to getting out important stuff to you guys, and we love you. And the show's fun. It's of course now we've moved into recruitment season, and so we're going to be talking about, and I guess roster season, which is sort of more broadly speaking. Since college basketball has changed significantly over just the last few years, is sort of as well, and we'll have more discussions about the roster. If you want to support the show, please go to thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support, or if you're lazy, tffinots.com/support. There you can do one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, like Kenneth, or you can do a recurring monthly donation through Patreon. That's a great way to support the show. Other ways to support the show: you can go to our sponsor of the show, namely Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off your order. They have excellent Michigan State products, T-shirts, hoodies, high quality screen printed materials. You won't go wrong there with any of their stuff. 20% off if you type in Final Four. That's just one word at checkout for 20% off. And also, if you're on the west side of the state, it is now spring, I guess. It feels definitely I've moved beyond spring.
No, it is. We've crossed over officially today. It was in the 60s, I think, in most of the state, and it looks like we're not even getting into the 40s for at least the next 10 days.
Well, maybe then golf season starts here. Baseball started. We were watching, sort of half watching the at least the game cast on our my son's phone during the basketball game tonight to watch the Tigers actually with their first win of the season as they
get their first win. And
I know, and it's funny. I didn't even think think about the Tigers because you go to Houston, you don't even think like Tigers. It's not like a central
right.
So maybe in 2 days, maybe we'll go. And we're joking that if the Tigers manage to win a second game tomorrow, that we somehow try and sneak in some whisked brooms or something like that. Go to Minute Maid Park, take some brooms in.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that. But
yeah, we were. It's kind of a miracle they won tonight, but it got to start somewhere. A 1-game winning streak.
That's right.
So let's briefly, before we begin, as longtime listeners know, of course, I won tickets by hitting free throws at the halftime at Michigan State. That's why I am here at the Final Four. Ordinarily, I would never go to Final Four if Michigan State wasn't playing or team I cared about. But I got to tell you my trip, Rod, because it was totally insane. So I had to get out of town late on Friday because I wasn't sure my work schedule. So of course, and then of course, when we're making the arrangements, I have to make arrangements for my daughter and my wife. So we have to get plane tickets for them. Well, there are no good flights out of Grand Rapids to get into Houston. So we decided to fly out of O'Hare. Why I thought this was a good idea, I mean, you look at the look at the prices.
It's never, ever, ever a good idea to fly out of O'Hare, to connect in O'Hare if you can avoid it. Stay out of O'Hare.
It was a complete mistake. And I think one of the last times I remember one of the times we were flying from. So this just tells you how dumb it was. This is 20 plus years ago. We're flying for my interview to get a job in Grand Rapids. We're flying from Iowa City, which let me tell you, if you fly from Iowa City and everything works perfectly, it's going to take you just as long to get from Iowa City to Grand Rapids as it does if you drive. so we, you fly to Cedar Rapids, you connect through O'Hare. Of course, the flights, if there's a hiccup anywhere in O'Hare, they just go ahead and cancel the flight, the little puddle jumpers to Grand Rapids or whatever. So anyway, we're going to fly out late, like 7 o'clock at night. It was great. It's a direct flight into Houston. It was perfect. Of course, as we're driving in, the storm of the century, whatever, the hail, there's lightning storm, and our flight gets canceled. It gets delayed and then canceled. We get up to the gate and they're like, yeah, well, we can get you to Houston on the 2nd of April. Well, that's not very helpful. That's Sunday that we've missed the first 2 games. So is there any way can you get us, anywhere close to Houston? Like, well, not really. I mean, we can fly you in at 3:45 on Saturday afternoon. I'm like, oh, that's really that. I'm, missing the first. It's that, to leave at 3:45 over here. There's no way you make it there till late. Anyway. So then a guy's like working his magic at the gates. Like, actually, I can get you out tonight because a flight that was supposed to go to Dallas got delayed, of course, because of all the storm. But the flight didn't leave till 11. We got in and it was delayed again. And so we didn't get in until 2:30 in the morning into Dallas, Fort Worth. Of course, there's no flight to Houston. So we have to change our car rental instead of getting it just ready in Houston. I change it to Dallas. Well, it takes an hour to find, a shuttle bus to get you to the rental center. So we don't get in our car until about 3:30 in the morning. Then I have a 4-hour drive to Houston. We get in
the car rental place was open?
24/7. Yeah. And It was actually, I have to.
That's not a given.
Oh, no, I know. I mean, I looked at it ahead of time because I'm like, I'm going to rent at 2 in the morning. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're open. But, it's the every 10-minute shuttle bus ran once an hour, right? So it finally picks you up, gets you there. It was the fastest car rental ever. I mean, it took me 5 minutes to rent a car. I've never had one where I get that quick.
No, that's insane.
Yeah, that was the only fortunate thing because it's a 4-hour drive, not much traffic from Dallas to Houston. Uh-huh. We get in, it's, the sun has risen now. We get breakfast. We go to the hotel, go to the check-in, and she's like, you're a little early check-in. I said, actually, I'm really late because I called ahead. I said, I'm going to be really late. So we get in, crash in a room, wake up around noon, go down to the Final Four stuff. And actually, it worked out great, although it was kind of weird. So we're like, in Chicago on the same day we're in Dallas and then also in Houston. But we saw a great game of Florida Atlantic, and then, of course, the next game was a laugher with Miami and Connecticut, and tonight's game was not that close. So it was almost a planes, trains, and automobile situation getting down to Houston, but we made it. And I've,
is this the first Final Four you've been to?
First one, yes, absolutely. Yeah,
okay, so you haven't been to any of the other MSU ones. Yeah,
correct.
I was just curious how you'd compare it if you had been.
So I've been to first round games. So we went to some first and second round games. Although Michigan State wasn't there, we was actually back at I think it was at the Palace. and it was Kansas was there. So we had a friend from Kansas who flew in to watch Kansas play, and I was in the same regional as well. So my wife could watch, and both teams got upset in the first round. So Kansas lost to Bradley. Iowa lost to Northwestern State or something like that, I think. And so we ended up going back on Sunday and we're like, yeah, neither team. We thought for sure, one of our teams, because they were like, I think the 2 seed and like the 3 seed, I think Iowa was when they got upset. And then we went to the regional final game against Duke in D.C. We just happened to be driving through, and we're like, oh wow! So I was there when Kenny Goins hits that shot, Cash Winston dribbling on. I mean, that's a good one. That was an amazing. Yeah. It was.
What I was more curious about though is, and I don't know how much of an opportunity you got to do this, but typically there's which you don't see with the regional games. There's stuff going on around it that can be interesting. So, for example, when the Final Four was here in Detroit, I actually met one of Dr. James Naismith's relatives. Oh. He had a booth on his relative, his very famous relative who invented the sport. Yeah. So you have things, weird stuff like that, Did you get a chance to go to any of that kind of thing?
So there was stuff at the convention. So, of course, because of our totally bananas arrival, we couldn't really do any of the, I had intentions of like, we'll just hang out, just the two of us there. We'll just go to this, tailgate stuff. So we didn't make any of that stuff. It was like at a convention center 5 miles away, but.
Yeah, typical. Oh, see, that's hilarious because, one of the things that Detroit got dinged for, obviously, because of the weather. And Houston's had the Final Four multiple times.
Sure.
But if that's the case, in Detroit, you had that stuff going on. And I'm trying to remember, and I'm drawing a blank where obviously the event was at Ford Field. I can't remember if they might have done the rest of the stuff at Cobo.
I was going to say Cobo Hall, yeah.
A lot closer than 5 miles. It was definitely a convention center, but a lot closer than 5 miles from the game site. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, they had a shuttle, I guess they're running. I didn't know about it. It's not easy to find all this stuff. So they do have like a tailgate, like a tailgate sort of thing with a Ferris wheel, and you could go play knockout, and they had pop a shot, and they had U.S. Army was there with like a mortar that you could launch basketballs at a 45-foot tall basket or fly a drone. So they had some cool stuff. It was kind of fun. We're waiting for to get in today because my wife because she and my daughter had to fly in that second flight late on Saturday, so they missed the first games, which they didn't have tickets anyway, and they didn't care. So they joined us today. My wife joined me today. And so she saw the stuff, and as we're waiting for the tailgate to open up, this guy walks by. He's like, "Oh man," because I was wearing my Michigan State shirt. He's like, "I wish you guys were here because there's just nobody here." It was, I don't know. I haven't.
That's another thing. I'm glad you raised that. That's another thing that I was curious about. Obviously, none of the participating schools, other than UConn, have, and they're nowhere near the top, have large basketball fan bases or fan bases, period. Even Miami, I think people assume because of the football success that they've had.
It's a small school.
But over the years, but it's small school. And if you look at attendance, even for football games, forget basketball, it's rough.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, this was not ideal.
No, I think that's probably true. Yeah. I would say the atmosphere, though. So I've been to Big Ten championship game or the Big Ten tournaments. I've been to that regional final. I've been to the first and second round. So I've been to a number of sort of events. I would say the energy and the juice in the arena on the Final Four day on Saturday was really pretty amazing. It was really great. There were people walking around chanting. FAU fans and SDSU fans and UConn and Miami people. So there were. It was pretty cool. There was a lot of energy in the arena.
That's the thing about it. I've been to a few. Detroit, I didn't go to the 2001 that we won it, so I've only been to Final Fours where Michigan State doesn't win ultimately. But Detroit, of the ones I've been to, was my favorite, obviously, because it was the only other time MSU's, in Izzo's tenure at least, MSU's actually won a game in the Final Four, and that was obviously a unique experience because it was like 90% Michigan State fans.
Oh, sure.
and yet, we had UConn, which has a credible fan base, Villanova, which has a credible one, North Carolina, which has a huge one.
Yeah.
And yet Michigan State was still 90%. But there is something about that atmosphere, especially on the semifinal day, where you've got all four schools involved. That is really something else. I would highly encourage, I think people should go to one anyway, if it's doable for you, just to experience it. Let's hope, we have, and we're going to start talking about in a second, some of the guys who may be part of bringing the next one to Michigan State, but especially if Michigan State is involved. I couldn't recommend it enough as an experience. It's a really unique thing. And you were too late to do this, it sounds like, but one thing that I've done a few times, and again, Ford Field was the apex just because of the circumstances. But if you go to the practice day,
right, where they're just dunking and kind of messing around.
And the Michigan State practice day at Ford Field was truthfully like a coronation. I mean, it was just incredible how many people. Normally, there's not a ton of people there for that. There was that day. and it was basically, a lot of it just consisted of the Michigan State players waving to fans. I mean, but it really was. It was something I'll never forget.
Yeah.
I remember that as clearly as I remember the win over UConn, and unfortunately what came next on Monday night. Well, that's good. I'm glad you had a fun experience, and that you got the opportunity to get there in the first place by winning that free throw contest. So that's and a lot of our listeners have kind of gone through this journey with you. So that's great.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been a great experience for my family and to hang with my son. And he's a big basketball fan too, but he turned to me, and after that FAU game where the San Diego State hit the shot at the buzzer, he's like, "I am so glad we're here. This is awesome." So that's the great thing, right?
It doesn't get much more dramatic than that. I mean, that was, the other two games weren't great from a competition standpoint, but the fact that we got 1 out of 3 that was like that is pretty amazing.
And you don't always get that,
even if it. No, you absolutely don't. And even if it was a guy winning in Brian Dutcher, that was the great thing about tonight with UConn winning, is that it denied Brian Dutcher a national championship. I would imagine at least some of our listeners know why I feel that way. Any Michigan State fan should feel that way. But anyway, I'm glad. You know why, I assume, right, Brian?
Oh, yeah.
Just in case listeners don't, Brian Dutcher, of course, was a longtime Michigan assistant under Bill Frieder and then Steve Fisher, and he was an instrumental part of the massive unchecked cheating that went on in that program for years and years. He didn't invent it. It was going on long before he got there, but he sure as hell helped sustain it. So screw him. I will say one more comment on this, and then let's get to the fun stuff that I'm sure people want to hear. I do find it remarkable, absolutely remarkable, that watching the way that CBS covered this, and I don't have a lot of objections to what CBS does with the tournament. I think generally they do a really nice job. But in talking specifically about San Diego State, and you have this complete whitewashing of the history of Brian Dutcher and Steve Fisher, who they highlighted a little bit too. Hey guys, there's a reason those two had to go to a relative college basketball backwater like San Diego State. You know why? Because they were busted for cheating their asses off. That's why. And you don't say anything about it. And again, I don't want to dwell on this, but then I think back to several years ago when ESPN engaged in the worst kind of yellow journalism since the Hearst newspaper chain getting us into the Spanish-American War.
Do you remember that, by the way?
I did some of my undergrad history work in that
USS
period.
Maine,
but anyway, the late 19th century, let's say, but I digress. And how that nonsense, that absolute nonsense, got brought up on occasion.
Yeah.
Now CBS didn't do it. And I understand, look, I'm a realist. I know that CBS is not going to spoil the fun of their celebration of college basketball by talking about the sins of Brian Dutcher and Steve Fisher. But the whitewashing, you cannot deal with that head on without attempting to create which they always do. It's their habit. It's just like the coverage of the Olympics. We've got to bring a human interest element to it. And, come on. These guys were cheats. They were cheats who got thrown out of Ann Arbor and then again had to go resuscitate their careers at San Diego State for a reason. So I can do without the sanctification,
the plucky upstart, right?
Of character, of characters like that. Screw them. Anyway, I never thought I don't find Danny Hurley a particularly engaging figure, but I never thought I'd be in a position where I was like, get it done, Danny, but I was tonight. So
that's how you know how bad you are if someone's cheering for Danny Hurley over you.
This is a bad Final Four in that respect. The only school I really felt okay about was Florida Atlantic because I don't love Miami either.
No, I know. Yeah.
The
NIL is kind of questionable and sort of what they do.
So it was not great. But anyway, let's get to the fun stuff.
And I actually stopped halfway the live read with it is spring. Gutter work, if you need it done in the west side of the state, the Grand Rapids area, out to Holland, Saugatuck, over up to Rockford, Lowell. If you need it done, contact the brothers that just do gutters. As the name implies, they just do gutters. They specialize in that. Kurt Stauffer and his team will set you up right. They'll give you 10% off if you mention Final Four. Email him at kurt.stauffer@brothersgutters.com. You won't regret it. If you need it cleaned, repaired, or replaced, he will take care of your gutters. So it's an important thing. Water's a problem in Michigan. All right, so let's talk about the commitment is, there are two ways to add people to your roster. Generally, it's with recruitment. Nowadays, obviously more transfer portals for some teams. Michigan State less so. And so we're going to talk about a 2024 commitment from Kur Teng, a 6'4", 190-pound wing, consensus top 40 recruit. So he's a great pickup for Michigan State to start off their recruitment season. He picked Michigan State over Rutgers and Providence. He's from out east. He's a native of Manchester, New Hampshire, the live free or die state. He plays for Bradford Christian Academy I think it's in Massachusetts, right?
Correct.
Let's talk about Kur Teng, and it's Kurteng. So fire away, Rod.
Great pickup. And this is one that was, to be honest, not unexpected. I would say from last fall, it became pretty obvious that there was a mutual admiration society going on between him and Michigan State. He is one of these guys that I have heard gets the OKG designation, our kind of guy. Uh-huh. So what does that mean? Well, obviously he's got some talent, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but also he's a guy that they see as physically and mentally tough. He plays hard. He wants to be coached hard, and his effort level doesn't have to be coached. That's an important thing. So he really fits that mold of the kind of guys that Tom Izzo likes to bring into his program. So we start with that, which is a great place to start. Now we can talk about talent, as you said, top 40. He plays in the prep school league in New England, which is arguably as good a level of high school competition as you'll find in the country. Michigan State, as I'm thinking about it, I don't know that I can recall Izzo ever getting a player out of this league. John Beeline used to work it. Mm-hmm. He got guys out of the New England prep school ranks. And obviously tons of other schools have as well. But I don't think Michigan State ever has. Interesting thing, his coach in both his prep school and his AAU coach plays for a program called Mass Rivals, which is on the 3SSB circuit, the Adidas circuit, is the same guy. That's a rarity. And his coach, it's interesting. I've seen quotes from him today. talking about how this is just a perfect fit because of the kind of kid that Kur is. And Kur has said that one of the reasons he committed to Michigan State is it all felt very familiar, which means both the way that he's used and how he's coached hard. And so he likes the idea of Tom Izzo being a guy who will push him to make him better because he feels like that's what he's had in his high school and AAU experience. So these are all things that would seem to line up very, very well. If you're talking about style and comparisons, he is primarily on the offensive end what we call a catch and shoot guy. Mm-hmm. So what that means is he's very comfortable coming off screens, popping out, receiving a pass, and going up with a jumper. That's a big, big part of his game. He's not really, and I'm not saying he's incapable of doing it, but it's not a primary part of his game to square a defender up, try to take him off the dribble, go to the rim. That's not who Kur Teng is. He is a very good shooter. He's very good in the mid-range, good, albeit a little bit streaky, kind of three-point shooter. I believe, if I recall correctly, last season in AAU, he shot 38% from three. Yeah, that's pretty good. But the way he got there was a little bit streaky. So it sounds like he might have a little bit of Gabe Brown in him. Gabe Brown was that way in high school and AAU. You know, one game he'd go 6 for 8, the next one 0 for 5. You know, and so the overall numbers are pretty good. But you didn't have that consistency. Yeah. He got better with that over his time at Michigan State. I would expect that Kur Teng has a chance to get better as he goes along in East Lansing as well. Defensively, they like his length. He's 6'4", but his wingspan is longer than that. He's strong. Looking at him, I mean, this is a kid who, if you see him, if you go out and look at clips, you can tell he's got broad shoulders. He's not huge right now. He's 6'4", and I think they list him at like 190. Yeah. But you look at his frame, he looks to me like a kid who can probably add some more good weight. And he's already pretty strong and pretty tough. So those are good elements to have in your favor as a perimeter defensive player. He's not an upper level athlete. I'd say he's maybe a little bit above average for the position. But you know, he's going to be a wing all the way. Mm-hmm. He's not a combo guard type. Decent handle, decent passer, can get better in those areas, but he's not, you know, some of the guys, Michigan State, we've talked about this a lot. You know, you look at the guys that Michigan State has been adding, and it's been a lot of guys who have that on-ball ability. That's not Kur Teng. He's going to be used coming off pin down screens, floppy action stuff, which is all screening stuff that Michigan State runs. And if you paid attention to anything Michigan State's ever done in basketball over the last 25 years or 27, you'll know that is always a big feature of the offense. Getting shooters loose via screening action and having guys who are capable of delivering in those positions. That's Kur Teng. I think if you're looking for comparisons, the best one I can think of from a Michigan State perspective, and probably even beyond that, is Josh Langford. He's not quite as tall as Josh was. Josh was 6'6", Kur's like 6'4", but extremely similar games. I mean, very similar games. Like Josh, his shot release is ultra smooth. He knows how to use screens at an extremely high level already, and I would anticipate he'll get even better at that at Michigan State. But that's a good place to start if you're trying to envision how Kur Teng plays, what he might be able to do within Michigan State's system, especially offensively. Think Josh Langford.
Yeah, so a couple questions come to mind. One is, you know, the one thing that we always focus on is rebounding in both the offensive and defensive end from the wings, and it's not something that Michigan State's been particularly strong at the last couple of years. Better this year, and you suspect next year will be even better if you actually have a healthy Akins and, you know, potentially Hall coming back. You know, not sure at this point. What do you see for him as far as rebounding from the wing position?
Well, look, he's not a great athlete. So the things that, let's say make Jaden Akins an effective rebounder, right? He doesn't have that kind of athletic horsepower, but his high school coach certainly spoke highly of him as a rebounder. And that's because he's got, again, a toughness to him. He's got some strength, and, it helps to be a high powered athlete, but it's not required.
No, for sure.
You can be, Denzel Valentine was a hell of a rebounding perimeter player, right? Yeah. He certainly wasn't any better of an athlete than Kur Teng is. So I would like to think that he has a chance to be effective there, but that's an aspect of his game I'm a little hesitant to make to have strong feelings about, just because I think you need to see it at this level. You need to see his instincts in that way. And I'm just not comfortable there yet, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out, because the mindset and the toughness seems to be where you'd want it. That's a good place to start.
And so the next obvious question is, when you're trying to construct the roster, with the transfer portal, with COVID years and all this stuff, is that position too crowded? Is it not crowded? Where do you see him fitting in 2024? Because you have to try and guess, I suppose, what the roster's be like, right? That's what Izzo's got to try and figure out. You've got to, because you can't have like 6 point guards, right? At some point you've got to try and figure out where people fit.
Look, I think that's a fool's errand at this point to try to do it with any kind of, and I'm not, but seriously.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah.
Anybody trying to do that right now is kidding themselves.
Yeah, sure.
We just don't know. So if you look at Michigan State next year, ideally, you're going to have, this is if everybody comes back, everything goes right. You have AJ Hoggard, Tyson Walker, and Jaden Akins as your 3 starters on the perimeter. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, if it's those 3 guys, I would expect them all to be gone after next season. Right now.
Yeah.
For sure, Walker would have to be. He'd have no choice. Theoretically, Hoggard could have another year, and Jaden Akins could come back for a senior year. But at this point, I would not expect that, if they're all back anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with that. So, okay, what do you have? Well, you have a current sophomore who would be a junior the next year, and Trey Holloman.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where Trey's going to be as a player yet at that point.
Right.
Jeremy Fears would be going into a sophomore year. Feel very good about him and his potential. And then you've got 2 other incoming freshmen. Garrick Norman for sure is going to be a wing, and I like his potential. Yep. And Cohen Carr, I think, will be a wing. That's my guess at this point. And I love his potential.
Yeah.
That is a guy, we're talking about 24, not 23, but that guy, look out.
Right.
Look out. So that's what you've got as it stands right now.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into this in a minute as we talk about the rest of the 24 class. So to me, that's a decent start. And you add Kur Teng, that's 5 guys on the perimeter. Is my math right? Yeah. That's 5 guys, assuming they're all still around.
Yeah.
That's a good place. That's a good place to start. But do you need more? Yeah, you probably need a couple more guys.
Mm-hmm.
So in that perimeter group in totality, I do not think Michigan State is done recruiting perimeter guys. I would be surprised if they didn't try to add another wing, and we'll talk about some possibilities in a minute. I think it's possible they might look to at least add another combo guard who could play on or off the ball. And I don't know, I'm not quite as confident about that yet, but there are a couple guys they're in on already that fit that mold. And then there's the transfer portal. So it's just really hard to say. I think this is the thing. I don't think Tom Izzo is playing that game too much.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to do it to an extent, but again, he knows better than anybody. The vagaries of this stuff, you can't know. He doesn't know yet what his team for next year is going to look like. Never mind 2 years. He doesn't know that definitively yet. He's got some indications, but he doesn't know.
Right.
So how can you know another year down the road right now. So I think what you focus on is adding guys that have the mindset, the personality, and the skills that you value in the program. And that's where Kur Teng really is check from everything we can tell. He makes perfect sense as a Michigan State guard. I don't think they had anybody currently expecting to be in the program that year who's exactly like him. You know, Garrick Normand is a very good shooter too, but I think he's a little bit different kind of player. Mm-hmm. He's a little better athlete for starters, maybe a little better with the ball in his hands. I think they would ask him to do some different things. I don't know, but Kur Teng is an exceptional scorer. He really has a knack, again, for using screens, getting a quick shot release, being very effective in that phase of the game, and that matters a lot. They didn't really have a guy quite like him in that mix. So that's what I think you're trying to do here.
Yeah.
You're just trying to add, and here's another thing too. I expect, and not every program is like this. A lot of programs go in the other direction. They're saying, well, maybe we'll only sign 2 guys in the high school.
Right. I was going to ask, that's a sort of other strategy.
Yeah. Michigan State's got 4 guys coming in 23, and I'm not going to be surprised if we see at least 3 and maybe 4 in this class. Because that's how Tom Izzo wants to do it. That doesn't mean he'll never take a portal guy. We know that because we've seen him do it. Mm-hmm. But if he has his preference, he's told you this 19 times this season, if he told you once. He wants to continue to do it the way he always has, which it means primarily you build a team by developing guys over multiple years who you have recruited out of high school.
Yep.
That is what he wants to do. So he is, I think, going to continue to try to operate as best he can in that fashion. And so, this is the first guy. He's not going to be the last they signed in this class.
Yeah, it's definitely philosophy when you look at it, because clearly, like you said, you could just go with 2 players and say, we're just going to fill up with the transfer portal. And, if you look at it, you say, well, you could use transfer players because the advantage is they have experience. Usually they've proven themselves, and you say, well, I can plug them in to my, if I have a hole here or there. The risk, of course, you run is if you have a foundation that you're building and 1-2 guys leaves, suddenly you've lost your foundation, and now you're plugging more than holes with transfer, and now you're kind of guessing how people are going to fit together. And the advantage, of course, with the high school recruitment is these players. I mean, you have a much better feel for 100%. What they're like, right? And you just 100%. Don't get that in a transfer. I mean, you could talk to coaches who coach them. You may have a reasonable idea. Maybe you had previously recruited them, like Joey Hauser or something like that. So you may know sort of what they're like. Yep. But for the most part, it is much more of a gamble. And as much as I think people are pointing out to all the transfers in college basketball, like Kansas State or whatever, and they're like, oh, see, this is maybe the new formula. Well, you could say that, but you can just as easily find 10 other schools that tried the transfer portal, and it failed completely. You look at Illinois, you look at Michigan, you look at Ohio State, that were kind of abject failures. And if anything, they have nothing to fall back on the following season, right? And so, I don't think there's one way that's right or wrong. It's just whatever you can get to work. But you probably have more stability, and as long as you're getting the good recruits, right? That's the key. If you're getting sub 100 recruits, and you may be struggling to use a high school recruitment sort of strategy. But I feel like if you're getting these top 10, top 20 recruiting classes, I mean, you're going to probably be okay as long as you've got enough experience elsewhere in your program that you can develop those young players.
Well, look, you can point to the programs that managed to do it successfully. Kansas State, obviously, is one that people will point to, with almost the entire roster being portal additions this year because they had no choice. And getting all the way to an Elite Eight. That's great. And I would never claim that you can't do it that way. But we've talked about this before here, and I'm going to say it again. What you just saw in that tournament is a 4 seed beating a 5 seed for the title. You had not just a Final Four, but an Elite 8 without any 1 seeds.
Yep.
And you only had 1 2 seed, Texas, make it to the Elite 8. I don't personally believe this is an accident. And if the number one suspect in the room for the lack of consistency nationwide, in my opinion, is the transfer portal. Mm-hmm. Even in situations where you're claiming it quote unquote worked. You know, Alabama added some guys, right? They were 1 seed, they got bounced in the Sweet 16. That's not a disastrous season. I'm not trying to claim that. But can you claim, given the expectations coming into the tournament, that it was a success? Do you think their fans, do you think Nate Oates feels it was a success? I don't know about that. And you can't blame it all on the transfer portal. But I think when you see this over and over and over and over, where nobody has consistency. By the way, even UConn had a dominant tournament run. Mm-hmm. They beat everybody by double digits that they played. Okay. Very impressive. And they looked the part of a national champion. Watching them play, at least I didn't feel like, wow, we just had a very mediocre team win it. They looked the part of a national champion, but they were a 4 seed for a reason. Because they had a really bad January. Why did that happen? Well, I would submit for the same reasons. Now, it's not like inconsistency only came into the arena when the portal started. Yeah. We all know that. Michigan State was inconsistent. They didn't have any portal additions this year, right? So it can happen to anybody. But I do think when you're looking at a team like UConn had some transfers in key positions. That has an impact. You can't convince me otherwise. So to bring it back around to Michigan State, Tom Izzo is saying, I'm not changing my philosophy, not fundamentally. I might add a guy here or there if I have to. Makes sense. Certainly, if it's a guy that they know well, you mentioned Joey Hauser. Most of the transfers Izzo has taken were guys that he either knew well previously or were guys from the region that he had experience, could get really good intel
right
on.
Yeah.
That's how he's going to do it, because he believes continuity and chemistry are huge deals. How can you know what you're adding when you're dealing with recruitment through the portal? Look at the timeline of these recruitments. Many of them are over in like a week. Sometimes they might go 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm talking about for, not guys at the end of the portal that are struggling to get into a, MEAC school, but the guys that high majors are going after.
Yeah.
You can't possibly have anywhere near the same level of understanding of that kid as you do when you're recruiting the typical high school kid. Now, Michigan State in the 23 class had a situation where they ended up recruiting 2 guys that hadn't even gotten offers in the spring of last year in Normand and Carr, but they were recruiting them for a few weeks prior to offering them.
Yeah.
That was, even having said that was highly unusual. The more standard issue Michigan State recruitment is Kur Teng or Xavier Booker or Jeremy Fears, where it's long scale, months and months and months, or sometimes even multiple years that Michigan State is on a player. Tom Izzo believes that's the key to his program being successful. Maybe it works for others, but I'm going to be really interested, Kansas State as an example. Jerome Tang's obviously a very, very good coach. He was a good assistant at Baylor for a long time, had a great year this year. Can't take that away from him. But it sounds like he's going to have to do a lot of rebuilding. Again, I don't know how heavy they're going to be in the portal, almost certainly not as heavy as they were this year, but I would expect they'll be back in the portal. They've already lost one of their guys to the portal. The kid who killed us, Masood, is already in the portal.
Yeah.
Can he do it again?
Yeah, maybe.
Is there, this is look, I mean, Brad Underwood probably felt like he had this stuff dialed in, because if you look back to year before this one, so last season, and you looked at guys he had added in the portal, he added Plummer, who was just a great addition for them, right? Gave them exactly what that team needed. Another shooter for a team that had lacked shooting before, really stepped up and hit it. Okay. Well, what happens this year? Yeah, Terrence Shannon had a great year statistically. Was he a winning player all the time? I don't know. Yeah. Matthew Mayer did some great things at times. Did that all work? No. And now he's anybody who's ever handled the ball at Illinois seems to be bailing out for the portal. So what kind of culture does he have? You know, these Michigan, Juwan Howard. Oh yeah, look, that first year of the portal's existence, he adds what was the kid's name? Their wing, Chauncey.
I keep thinking Smith.
I'm drawing a blank on the kid that was the back. Well, Smith was the point guard, but then they added another kid who was a very important wing reserve for them. Yeah. And, you know, that team goes to the Elite Eight. They win the Big Ten. Oh, Juwan's a transfer master. Yeah. How's it gone the last 2 years?
Yeah.
You know, so live by the portal, die by the portal.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Probably the way that somebody like Tom Izzo sees it. And that's why I'm going to be surprised if 24 is not another large high school class for him. Now, there's no guarantee you're keeping all those guys.
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
But that's his preferred way of doing this. And I don't expect to ever see him vary from that. Yeah. Doesn't mean he'll never add a guy in the portal, but if you're looking for the fundamentals of what this program is going to be, it's going to be the same thing you've seen the entire time he's been here.
Well, we'll see if Tom Izzo manages to pull off a program that's consistent. Well, I don't know, that's successful.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a real challenge. Right.
I would say, you know, Michigan State fans, and I think part of the reason this allure of the portal is, you know, it was partly due to the fact that they go into the portal and grab Kenneth Walker, right? And they have a Heisman Trophy base caliber player immediately, right?
That didn't help.
I think it's sort of just.
But look at that. Look at football.
That's what I mean. It's like you have a person. Yeah. And was it because Mel Tucker's a great evaluator talent? Probably in some level, but in some ways that's just kind of like a kind of random lucky sort of guess, right? And that the portal is clearly one he's seen is not the solution to the long-term success for Michigan State football. You have to get high school recruits. You have to get the offensive alignment and those sorts of things. You can't do that just through the portal,
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that's and you've got there's a mix, right? You go after Tyson Walker because there's a perceived gigantic hole at the point guard, and that was a disastrous season in some respects for Michigan State. A really frustrating one for Izzo. And so he goes and turns out he had Hogarth who developed enough that could, muddle through. But you had the backup in Walker, and he's turned out to be, fantastic in other ways. But anyway.
Yeah, no, this is all just to wrap it up. There are differences between football and basketball. The big one being if you add 2 impact players in basketball, that can be enough to carry you to a conference title.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
In football, I mean, Kenneth Walker was a real rarity. Yeah. He was one of those rare,
generational talents.
One guy makes a massive difference, right? But that's a big difference between the sports. So I understand why fans in a general sense get enamored of the portal, but I think that I am very comfortable, let's put it that way, with the way that Tom Izzo is approaching this stuff. And, there are always going to be fans who see a quick fix available and see it seemingly working at other places and start moaning and groaning about why Izzo won't get with the times. Well, let's see when the final chapter is written how that goes, because I can tell you that I think if you're going into every season with your program constantly having to reinvent things, I don't see how you can realistically look at that as a model for success, consistent success.
Right. Yeah.
You might catch lightning in a bottle, but and you look at it, there's some programs. I mean, Michigan's one where they're in a position where they're going to have to, they have no choice.
Yes.
They're going to hit the portal hard this year. And you don't know where it's all going to land, but I know this, I wouldn't want that to be my program.
Yeah.
Illinois, same thing. Illinois is going to have to hit the portal hard. I wouldn't want to be them, and so I'm personally going to enjoy every season we get out of Tom Izzo for that reason, in addition to many others. Why? Because I'll admit it, I like the experience as a fan of being able to follow guys over multiple years, and you deepen that relationship with them. You see them grow. I can't count the number of guys who've come into Michigan State and been very nervous in interviews. You look at them and you see that they're a kid.
Yeah.
And then you look 3, 4 years, 5 years, some cases down the line, and you see what they've matured into. And it's so gratifying to see that. That's something that, honest to God, I appreciate as a fan, to watch guys develop. And that's what Tom Izzo always talks about. So I'm grateful that Michigan State, at least for now, still has that kind of program. And, it's not going to probably always be that way.
Yeah, no, you appreciate when you've got it. And I think,
and I also say that, just one more point. I also say that as somebody who, I have no problem philosophically with the existence of the portal. Where I find myself, I understand every criticism Izzo says. I agree with him that he's right about all that stuff. A lot of kids get left holding the bag without a scholarship at the end of it. A lot of guys end up making decisions for the wrong reasons, and they do damage to themselves, to their career, on a lot of levels. And so and they're not having to learn as much as maybe they could about what it takes to overcome adversity and obstacles in your life. I get all that. I still land on the side of they should have freedom, just like any other college student has, to move. So so I'm not opposed to the portal, but what I am saying is I prefer the way Michigan State operates if I have the choice.
Yeah, I feel in some ways it's sort of like a little bit like with Major League Baseball. You have more of a love for the players that you bring up through your own farm system and develop, and then they go on your team versus just getting free agents out.
Absolutely, so that's a very common. You love to watch. I look at it just a real quick example, because I think the sport that has the roughest relationship with what we're talking about is the NFL, because free agency is such a big deal. It affects so much of a roster, more so than in most other sports, I think, certainly professional sports. And, because the Lions were not only competitive for the first time in a while, but were just filled with great personalities. And it was such a great story. I got into following that in a way that I haven't cared about the NFL in a long time, probably since Barry Sanders hung them up. And it was a great experience, starting with Hard Knocks on HBO and going through the rough start, and then to see them come out of it and almost make the playoffs, just play great football. And you got to know all these guys, and Jamal Williams being a great example, the running back. And then he's gone.
Yeah, I know.
know, and that's, whatever, it is what it is. It's nobody's fault,
it's the sport,
necessarily, but it's the sport. It happens. And, it didn't used to be that way I'm not, get off my lawn,
but
it's just the truth.
Right?
It's just the truth. I'm not screaming at a cloud. But it was the truth. Like when I was a kid, the Steelers were the Steelers, because it was every year it was the Steelers. And there'd be occasional shifts, but not much. The Raiders were the Raiders. The Cowboys were the Cowboys, even into the 80s. And once you had free agency initially, it still kind of stayed that way. The 49ers, had a long run, and, on and on and on. And you get to know these teams over the course of 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, that is something that is missing. And college was always different in that you had a restricted period of time.
Yeah, right.
You were always going to be there no more than 4 or 5 years, but now we've really gone extreme. And I do wonder what that's going, if there's going to be an eventual negative fallout for the sport as a whole as a result of that. I tend to think that what matters most to people is somebody wearing the school name on the front of their jersey.
I agree.
But it is a test.
Yep, for sure.
When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team? If you're building your talent roster, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like matching, assessments, and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. And something that I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy because candidates you invite to apply through Instant Match are 3 times more likely to apply to your job than candidates who only see it in a search, according to U.S. Indeed data. So join over 3 million businesses worldwide using Indeed to hire great talent fast. Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you need to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/Blue Wire to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
All right, let's blow through these. Not blow, but we're going to talk about the next 8 targets for Michigan State for the 2024 class real briefly. And then there'll be the next episode will be on just the Big Ten in review, so you can catch that in a few days. So let's begin with Jess McCullough, 6'9", power forward from Cleveland, Ohio, and stretch 4 with big potential.
Yeah, if I had to name a guy that I think is likely to be the next commit, it would be Jesse McCullough. And that's because he's pretty much, he and his family have spoken about Michigan State in very, very glowing terms. And I have heard that it is considered, and take this for what it's worth, but I've heard that it is considered that he's likely to be the guy, the next guy. And he makes sense because, well, first of all, you always want guys at that position in the modern game who can shoot. And Tom Izzo has wanted guys who could shoot at that position for a lot longer than it was in vogue. I mean, he had AJ Granger, right?
Yeah.
So that's 25 years ago. I mean, he's always valued that before most coaches did. McCullough's that kind of guy. I think that I will not be surprised to see a commitment come fairly soon. It wouldn't surprise me if it was in the next month or so. He's a guy that I don't have the sense the recruiting services have fully caught up to him. He's ranked in the top 100, but at the lower end, the sense I have is that Michigan State feels he's better than that. He's not incredibly strong in the upper body right now. That's an area that will have to improve. But it's funny. I think even though they talk about him as a stretch, from what I've seen in clips, game clips, he looks a little more natural as a post player than, say, Xavier Booker does. So I don't think he's exclusively, this is a guy who's going to float around and all he's going to do is take jump shots. I think he might actually be a multi-level scorer for Michigan State, especially as he gets stronger. But very good player. He's got offers from other Big Ten schools. I believe Michigan offered him. I believe Ohio State offered him. But the feeling is pretty good that he's going to be a guy at Michigan State. He'd be my pick for the next one that's likely.
So next would be Aiden Sherrill, 6'10", originally from Detroit, now playing in Phoenix, which seems to be a very common occurrence nowadays, people playing out of state from Michigan.
Yes.
Top 30 recruit.
Yeah, very athletic. Again, another guy who's got some stretchability. I would say he's not as reliable with the jumper as McCullough is, but he certainly has that potential. And he was a guy that had strong interest in Michigan State early and vice versa. Now, again, he's another guy, fits the mold. You can think about guys that they've had. He's got some Xavier Booker to him, maybe some Jaren Jackson. He's that kind of, and I'm being very rough with the comparisons, but he's that kind of player. But I don't think it's going to work out. I think that McCullough, again, is going to take that spot. And I don't think they're going to look to sign two players like that. And it also seems that, from what I've heard, it seems like the favorite is Alabama for Sherrill. So it won't be surprising to see that's how it ends up. But, it'll be interesting because he's a guy who is more highly regarded nationally right now than McCullough. I'll be interested to see how that plays out over time, because I'm not sure there's as much of a difference between them as the rankings would suggest, but that's just my personal opinion.
Sure. Next is a guy who I hope comes to Michigan State because I love his last name, Flory Bidunga, 6'10" center from Kokomo, Indiana. He is a top 5 recruit. So, I mean, it's obviously lots of talent and a center position who you'll probably need. Although, it's funny. In some ways, you kind of look at Michigan State's center position. You're like, yeah, it looks a little clogged up, maybe potentially in the next year or two.
You could have this group for 2 more years, potentially, because Mahdi would be eligible to take a COVID year. So he could have 2 more years left if he so chooses. Look, Bidunga is a big time player. I can't put that strongly enough. I think you can make an argument that he is certainly the most dominant center recruit in this part of the country since Greg Oden.
Wow. And
for people who might not remember, I mean, Greg Oden in high school and his year at Ohio State was dominant. This guy has got, it's some of that. He also kind of reminds me in some ways, not the totality of his game, but around the basket, he reminds me a little bit of Chris Webber when I've seen him. Great hands, and he's an angry finisher. He's just really, really good. And there's a small chance, from what I've heard, that he might reclassify to 23, but that seems unlikely. I think the betting is that he stays in 24. He plays for Kokomo High School, which, by the way, we're a former Michigan State player, and transfer edition, Brandon Wood. The first year of the grad transfer rule, they got him. That's where he played. And he led Kokomo to the biggest school classification championship game where they lost to Indianapolis Ben Davis. But look, Bidunga just tore up AAU last year. He kind of came from relative obscurity to be a top 5 guy. I don't see that kind of ranking changing. I think he's at that level. Just athletic, strong, and dominant. I mean, you can't put it any other way. And he, unlike, some of these centers that we've talked about all year or the last several years in the Big Ten, I think he can play the modern game. He's athletic enough that you're not going to have to play him necessarily in drop coverage.
Gotcha.
I don't know that he's a shooter at this point, but that's okay. Defense is where I get more exercised about that. He unofficially visited MSU in early November. By all accounts, it went very well. But I have to be realistic. I think that Indiana and Cincinnati, believe it or not, and there are reasons for that, are seen as the favorites right now. I think it's going to be very interesting, and you can tell a lot if you haven't spent much time following recruiting over the years, which is probably a very small percentage of our listenership. But if you haven't, a great tell for where Michigan State's interest lies is when you read reports about these, especially the shoe circuit stops, where they're in a city for 3 days and a team will play, whatever it is, 5 or 6 games. pay attention to the reports and see who Tom Izzo's watching. So, and Flory Bidunga, it's interesting this year, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but Michigan State is a Nike school. And over the years, they've had a disproportionate number of kids that played either for Nike programs, or this year was an example where a couple of them played for grassroots programs that weren't part of a shoe circuit team.
Right.
This class, there's a lot of Adidas and Under Armour affiliated kids, and I'm not quite sure why that is, but anyway, Flory Bidunga plays for an Adidas program, Indy Elite, very good long-standing program out of Indiana. And if Tom Izzo is a frequent visitor to his games, then that they're serious, they're remaining serious about it, and they think they're in it. So that's going to be, as we move through April into May, these next couple months, AAU really gets ramped up. That's going to be a storyline, because Bidunga is going to be one of the big recruitments nationally, for good reason.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an exceptional player potentially. Right now, I would say, Indiana is perceived to be the leader in the clubhouse. He's been to several games over the course of this season, but he's, it's close.
Sure.
So we'll see what it means when recruiting really starts to ramp up over the next couple of months.
And he's, we've talked before, like a lot of these players, you don't really want to wait too long to make your decision, because there's not as many players taken out of high school, especially with the COVID years still out there and stuff. And so you almost have to jump at it, unless you're one of the top, whatever recruits. And so he's the kind of guy who can kind of wait as long as he wants, really, in order to get it the spot he wants.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next player, Tyler McKinley, 6'9" stretch from Cincinnati.
Yeah, another guy, fills that run. And it's interesting. If I'm right about McCullough, does that mean the recruitments of Sherrell and of this guy stop? It might. It might be first come, first served.
Right.
Because I don't think they're going to take two guys like that. I'd be surprised. But McKinley, really good player, seems to be getting better. I read he plays at Link Academy in Missouri. He's originally from Cincinnati, so another Ohio kid. But he plays his ball at a prep school in Missouri. And they are part of this event going on now called the Geico Nationals, which is kind of the high school national championship for prep schools. You see it on ESPN every spring. And he performed very, very well in that event. So he seems to be getting better. He's ranked a top 60 player currently, but Michigan State has offered him. They compare him to Draymond Green. He's 6'9", a little bigger than Draymond, but the Draymond comparison is because he's a guy they see as being a good passer, has good court vision, can make plays for other people. But again, he's another stretch four type as well. He can shoot from the perimeter. He's talked about setting up visits over the next several weeks to schools like MSU, Tennessee, Xavier, Ohio State, Cincinnati. So you see I mentioned he's from Cincinnati. You see a heavy Ohio flavor in that. Yeah. But it looks like MSU will probably get an official as well, and that could happen shortly. It would. I haven't seen any details about it real recently, but I think it was in February he was talking about that. So you could see him on a visit soon. But again, it's what you were talking about a second ago, that first come first serve thing. If a guy like McCullough has decided, that Michigan State I think is where I want to be, you don't have a lot of motivation to not pull the trigger the way you used to. Yeah.
So the next would be 6'6" wing from Ohio, stay in the same region, Jonathan Powell.
Yeah, a kid from Dayton. MSU offered him this fall. I believe he's been in a couple times over the course of the fall and the winter. He's a guy that he's again underrated. He does show up in some top 100s, but from what I've seen and what I've heard, I'm going to be very surprised if he is not a very fast riser this AAU season. I wouldn't be surprised if by the summer we're talking about him as maybe even a top 50 guy. He looks very, very good to me. He's 6'6", skilled, smooth, athletic. the word I got was when he was on his visit, he was extremely impressed at MSU. But how that plays out, and a valid question is, does today's commitment change anything?
Right.
I personally don't necessarily believe that's the case. I can see a path, as we talked about, for Michigan State wanting 2 wings. And Powell is a different kind of player than Teng. He's also very skilled too, but he's longer. He's 6'6". He's a better athlete. So he can do some things maybe differently than Teng. I wouldn't say he's the half court, shot hunter technician that Teng is, but he's a very good player potentially. So definitely a name to watch. And again, you're going to know early where MSU is with some of these guys, because you're going to start seeing reports of coaches being at their games.
Right. Next is another wing, 6'6", top 10 wing, Bryson Tucker, who's out east again. Michigan State moving their recruiting reach out for a lot farther than just the Midwest. He's in Baltimore.
He's from Baltimore, and it's an interesting situation. And I can't get the full story. So he started last year at IMG in Florida.
Right.
He transferred down, playing his first 2 years in high school in Baltimore, and got off to a great start. And then in early January, he left. And I don't think he played anywhere else, which wouldn't be surprising, tough to do at that point of the season. But I'm not sure that he's announced any plans for where he'll be next year. Very talented kid. In fact, so talented, he's part of an Under Armour commercial that got released in March, where it's him, or a couple of players, I think from one player from the WNBA. I think there was a player from South Carolina's women's team, and Steph Curry and Bryson Tucker. Those are the 4 people in the commercial. So, and he's a Maryland kid. The owner of Under Armour, the CEO, is a Maryland guy, University of Maryland guy.
Oh, okay.
Actually. So not a surprise. This is an interesting one because he's an elite recruit. Again, he's in the top 10 for a reason. Good size at 6'6". He's a smooth shot maker, but a good athlete. He's strong, do a lot of things at a very high level. So he's no joke. He was a guy that Duke has been in on for years. And so there was this suggestion that he was just kind of one of these guys, and it happens sometimes that way with Duke, especially, where they're just kind of dialed in on a player, and the player isn't really considering anybody else, and he's just going to end up at Duke, and everybody understands
right.
it, And Michigan State's had some guys like that in the past too, but they tend to be Michigan kids when that happens. But an interesting thing happened. Tucker really became really enamored of Michigan State, to the point that in December, just before he left IMG, he was talking about how as soon as the season was over in the spring, he wanted to start taking officials, and he knew that the first official he wanted to take was Michigan State.
Interesting.
Very interesting. I don't know where any of that is.
Yeah.
When you see a kid leave, you never know. Could be a sign of something, could be nothing. And even with the expressed interest of Michigan State, Duke is certainly still a factor there, you would think. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Again, if he schedules a visit coming up in the next several weeks, and or Michigan State is a frequent attendee of his games in AAU, well, then you got your answer.
Yeah.
But again, another wing. Are they still on the market for a wing after today? I think they probably are. And Tucker's a big time talent. I mean, he's a guy you would take.
Well, speaking of
if it's just about talent.
Right. Well, speaking of tea leaves, next player is Jase Richardson, son of Jason Richardson, former Michigan State star and NBA, star as well. He plays out in Las Vegas, and he's a top 40 point guard recruit.
Yeah, and more of a combo guard. I mean, Jase Richardson, I would describe as what they used to call a lead guard, which meant guys that have the ball in their hands a lot, but they primarily look to score as opposed to facilitate play bait for others. That's what Jase Richardson is stylistically. He's been a big time player for a long time. 6'2", he's kind of stocky, strong. Good athlete, not on his dad's level, maybe very good, but not on his dad's level.
Certainly shorter. Yeah.
You're thinking a 6'2" version of his dad. It's not quite that. But a good athlete and a guy who can definitely score. I'm not under the impression that he's not a Jeremy Fears as a playmaker. He's a different kind of player. Again, much more of a scorer's mentality. He officially visited MSU in October, and it seemed to go very well. And honestly, there had been a feeling for a while that, well, it's not even going to be serious with Michigan State. Kid's grown up. He's never lived in Michigan.
Yeah, right.
He's grown up on the West Coast. So, his affinity for MSU is not maybe what you would assume it is. And his dad just does not seem to be prone to pushing from what I've heard. He's not looking to drive the recruitments of his sons. And there's another son who was a freshman this year at Gorman who's bigger. And I saw him play actually a game this winter back in December or January. I think it was December. And he was really impressive. Jase Richardson. So that's another name to maybe watch for. But Jase, visited MSU on an official in October, and it went very, very well. And he's also high on, I've seen Arkansas, Kansas, Florida, and others. Look, if I have to make a call here in April, I wouldn't expect Jase Richardson to be part of the class. And in part, it's because I expect wherever he goes, he's going to be looking at wanting to step right in.
Yeah. Play right away. Yeah.
Be a starter. And probably with the ball in his hands a lot. And at Michigan State, look, for as long as Jeremy Fears is at Michigan State, after next year, of course, I think he's going to have the keys. I am so sold on that kid. So I just don't know. I think Michigan State would like to add a guy with capability of playing on the ball to this class, but I think that it might need to be a guy who's okay with a year, maybe breaking in and being a rotation guy. Because again, it's not even just Jeremy Fears. You've also got Trey Holloman.
Yeah, right. It's easy to forget.
So, and Trey Holloman's going to get better. I'm convinced of that. So it's challenging, but I do think they would like to add another guy like that. I just don't know if I think Jase Richardson, big time talent. It's not that. I don't know if he's going to see that as a great fit for what he wants. And
don't discount the fact that SoCal next year, Big Ten country. All right, finally, we're going to go to Phat Phat Brooks, 6'3" combo guard from Grand Rapids Catholic Central. I know he's visited Michigan State a number of times, and he's on everyone's radar in the Midwest for sure. Yeah, and
it's an interesting recruitment because he's generally seen as a guy outside the top 100. And I don't think he had quite the high school season that maybe was expected. It wasn't terrible. It's just he'd been part of a state championship team last year. They didn't repeat. And I don't think he dominated maybe quite as much as people thought he might. But I personally think he's a very good player. He actually, and I don't think he's at this level, but he actually reminds me a little bit of Cassius in that he has a knack for playing the game at his pace, or he can when he's fully engaged. And you're not necessarily wowed when you look at him in terms of the physical tools, but he can get a lot done. So in any event, it's an interesting recruitment because again, he's outside the top 100, but he's got offers from Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, and others. So obviously coaches feel like he's a guy capable of playing. I think this one will be interesting to watch how it evolves. I know for a fact his family are all big Michigan fans, but Michigan State offered a lot earlier, almost a full year, I think, earlier than Michigan did. He has been to Michigan State numerous times. They certainly recruited him like a guy they really want. And from what I could tell, have shown him more attention over time than Michigan has. I'm wondering about a lot of things. Michigan also has a point guard already committed in that class. So how does that impact things? I think people believe that Phat Phat can move off the ball too, but you don't know. There are some that question whether he's a guy at a level MSU should be taking him. Again, because he didn't have a great high school season last year. So I think his AAU play is going to be very important with the family. He had a great AAU season last year, playing for 16 and unders. He might need that again to really keep the high or expand his offers even further. But he's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on for sure. And again, another one, there's nobody else on the family 17 and under team right now, at least, that I think Michigan State has expressed interest in. So if you're seeing Michigan State coaches showing up at family games, that's a pretty good indication that they're still serious about Phat Phat. And the other thing I want to say before we wrap this up, though, because this is important, these are guys that are worth mentioning right now as we sit here at the beginning of April. Every year, almost every year, Michigan State expands its offer list as the AAU season goes on. Mm-hmm. This time last year, Cohen Carr and Gehrig Norman were nowhere on MSU's radar.
Right.
Not in terms of having an offer, at least. They were aware of who they were, but there wasn't a serious recruitment yet with either kid. It changed. Could be a very similar thing happens this year. There could be guys that we have not talked about that all of a sudden become of high interest to Michigan State and vice versa. So I say that just a caution. Do not think that this is exclusively the pool of players that Michigan State will be drawing from, because it might change.
All right, well, that's a good place to wrap it up. It's things change. We get new commitments, or something happens in the portal, or there may be a roster move, and Michigan State will come back with another episode. Again, like I said, the next episode is going to be, after this one, is going to be just the recap for all the Big Ten teams. And then I think probably in a week or so, we're going to just kind of go over where the Big Ten is as far as, everyone's roster or lack thereof. There's a lot of movement.
A lot of changes, right? Just every day there are more of them.
Yeah.
We've had a coaching change in the Big Ten that we didn't necessarily expect to see, but it happened. And lots of roster movement. Yeah. So everything's in flux.
I know when I looked a couple of days ago, there were 1,116 players in the portal. I'm sure there are probably an extra 500 since I last looked. And I think
it's knocking on the door of 1,500 now, from what I understand.
That's not surprising. And then I think the deadline is May 11th. So really, you don't know anything until. I mean, we're just barely begun, and the NCAA tournament just ended. So there's still players.
Well, here's what's going to happen. So some of those 1,500, 1,300, whatever it is right now, some of those players are going to commit to places, and then that in turn is going to cause other guys that were on that roster to leave.
Yeah.
So we're not nearly done.
Yeah. There's a really nice fan from FAU who was there at the Saturday game, and he's like, it was a tough game or whatever, but those are all like freshmen and sophomores. We're going to still be good for a while. I'm thinking to myself, we'll see how many of those players are still around. I mean, they're going to get poached.
That's
right.
That's going to be the all-time challenge. But I'll tell you this, not to belabor this episode, but the biggest break Florida Atlantic got is that this was a weird year, or at least it has been to date, in the hiring cycle. Right. Because normally a guy like Dusty May, coming off the season he's had, would be at a high major, no questions asked. But it was a weird, Chris Beard got forced out of his job. So he's suddenly available for Ole Miss. That was the job that people thought Dusty May might get. Instead, Chris Beard gets it. There just haven't been opportunities. So Florida Atlantic, right before the Final Four, announced a long-term extension. That doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot. But honestly, in this situation, I think I'm going to be surprised if he's somewhere else right now.
Yeah.
And so that might actually give him a chance to hold a lot of that team together. But you make a really, really good point. Nor under the history of the sport, if you were a team like that was freshman and sophomore dominated, you'd feel fantastic, because you'd say, well, we got at least another bite or two at the apple.
Yeah. Right.
You don't know today.
Well, we're going to wrap it up there because it's gone kind of long. Again, reporting to you from Houston and the Final Four. Oh, also we'll get the now that I think about it too. But one last thing is we do have the bracket challenge, and I hate to mention this, Rod, but I beat you because
Really?
I had Connecticut in the final in the final game. I had them losing to Alabama, but so I managed to.
Good for you.
I managed to somehow squeeze that out, so I ended up, I think, 15th or something like that. In my office pool, I was up to 5th. It's the highest I've ever been. So
where did I
I think you're like 27th or so. So pretty good, or maybe
I'll take
less. I have to check. My son was 27th.
Top 25%. I'll take that.
I don't quote me on that. We'll kind of figure it out. We're going to track down the top 3 winners. I'll have to look things up to win your prizes. So anyway. Stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe if you're not yet subscribed. Visit our sponsors, Nudge Printing and Brothers at Just Two Gutters. Until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.
Well, I'll be a hitchhiker in an Easter Bunny costume. Hop in. Where you headed?
BJ's Wholesale Club to do my Easter shopping. I have so many baskets to fill.
That costume is so lifelike. There's not even a zipper.
Oh, there's BJ's. I can hop out here.
Look at him go.
Get a $15 digital coupon when you spend $150 on practically anything in one transaction through April 9th. Coupon will appear in your digital coupon gallery on April 13th. Go to bjs.com/Easter coupon for details. BJ's. Absurdly simple savings.